Jason. Hey, congratulations on your new documentary, Some Cup of Salvation.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
So tell us what sparked you to do this documentary.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been making films in the wine space for God, almost about 10 years or so. And every single time, I make them, it's sort of a different genre. But I've always been trying to get to this ultimate question of like, what does wine mean to to people who live in a place? There's this whole term of terroir. It's kind of I would say a marketing term in wine often, but it really does mean something. And so I started to look at wine and how intertwined it was with religion and why people are where they are. And I found a chance to turn wine into a geopolitical story. And so we went to Armenia and found a group of people who had survived in this place for many, 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 many thousands of years. And it just so happens that wine was probably invented in the same place. And so along that way, what happens with documentaries, things you can't plan are sometimes the best. And tragic in this case, we got caught in the middle of a war and found a way to sneak into Iran and make the first wine in that country since the revolution. So it's a tough question to answer because for about 10 years, I had been hoping to make a film that could actually say what wine meant to human beings, not just alcohol or, the standard stuff, but by infusing it with a place people are from.
I found it fascinating that you chose Armenia out of
Hmm.
all the countries, out of all the places around the world.
Sure.
How how in the world did you land in the spot of Armenia? Because, when a lot of us think about wine, we don't think of Armenia, but I
Yeah,
guess that's,
yeah.
that's the entire point of your film.
That's exactly right. So, you know, I have to say, and this is maybe a little geeky, but all the wine we drink, at least 99.9% of it is from one species called Vitis vinifera. So Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Riesling, everything. Whether it's in France or Portugal, America, it doesn't matter. It's all that same species. And that species came from somewhere. And so genetically, it's been recently figured out that that area is probably the north central Caucasus Mountains, and that would be northern Iran, Armenia, or Georgia. And so I became obsessed with where's the first grape? Is it still alive? The father and mother of every wine we drink. And so this cave got discovered in Armenia called the RNE1 Cave Complex. And we were the first people to film there. It is rewriting history as we have this conversation, as far as the first shoe ever found, the first human brain cavity intact ever found, and then of course the first winery ever found on any kind of scale. And so that is the point. Armenia is this country that has been owned and occupied by basically every force throughout history and been fighting for their own existence. And it's the strangest thing in the world that the thing that they started with, Herodotus wrote about how good of winemakers the Armenians were, has been forgotten. And all of a sudden, for them to reclaim their identity as a people is a thing that they've had all along that people are just waking up to. They're figuring out that they have this. So that is the point, because you think of France, but France is definitely not the founder of wine. Neither is anywhere else in Europe. And there's an argument for the Caucasus Mountains and somewhere in China and potentially somewhere in northern India being the first to make wine. So I think that the Western civilization needs to take a look at where our stuff that we've made famous comes from, I think.
And the history that you go through, they've been making wine for centuries, but it seems like it's a struggle to keep that tradition because they kind of like do it and then stop and then do it and then stop over and
That's
over again.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Being in a place that's like such a crossroads, it's been all through the Silk Road, all through the Mongol invasions, all through the Ottoman Empire, all through the Romans. They were constantly occupied. And then you have the Soviets. And so a religion was a big factor. Obviously, a lot of these countries were Muslim and you can't make alcohol. And then with the Soviets, they were designated not to make wine anymore. So there's a constant stop and start. But when you look at groups of people who should by all reason and logic be extinct effectively, there's been genocides against these people. There's been shifting of borders. There's been wars. They shouldn't exist. And neither should these grapes. The Arni grape, which could be the oldest, if not one of the oldest in the world, it still exists despite all of this stuff. And so, regardless of the starts and stops, somehow through perseverance, the grape, which for me is an analogy to people, that are able to survive. So the starts and stops in a strange way make this even more special. that this story has not really been told, that Armenia is the potential birthplace of the grape.
So in essence, your documentary is not just about the wine, but it's also about the people in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's, I like to use wine as an analogy for something else always. And in the case of this, I mean, wine sits on the table. A bottle just sits there. It doesn't do anything. But when you drink it with the right people, you laugh, you cry, you think about things, you talk about stuff. You might be at a wedding. It's wine is about everything. Truly, it really is. I mean, if you can sit there and smell it and say, I smell berries and things in the wine, but you can also say, you know, without wine, would there be Christianity? I mean, would there be Judaism? Would there be Zoroastrianism? Would there be, it's something that humans have carried on their back in the form of grapevines since we picked up and walked to a place and settled down. So to me, it's something that has a tremendous history with humanity, but also can be light and fluffy and fun, something you just drink at dinner. It doesn't have to have all that weight, but it can. And so that's the important thing. It is about people. Absolutely.
Now, tell us about the other journey in your documentary of the Northern Iranian.
Yeah.
It sounded like you just stumbled across that story.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I've always wondered, I've filmed in every wine region in the world pretty much, and I've met in many of them multiple times. But Iran has been it's an impossible place to do film. Shiraz, a city in the south, and in the north in Kurdistan, those are places that, Cyrus the Great and the ancient Greeks talk about how good the wine is. But it's like after the Islamic Revolution, before there were 300, 500 wineries there, the French were putting millions of dollars of investment. It was exploding. And then, of course, the religious revolution of 79 shut it all down. They ripped out most of the grapes. But there's always been this question of what happened to them. And you can't even ask that question because people look at you, they go, who knows? I mean, what are you going to do? Go there? So basically, I was in Armenia doing a pre-interview with Vahe, who's the main character of the film. And he just casually mentioned to me, do you know that you're, 19 kilometers from the Iranian border? And I looked and I'm like looking at this desolate mountain, beautiful landscape. And I said, you're kidding me. I mean, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Iran might as well be the moon. And so I said, what's the border like? He's like, well, Armenians can go in and out of Iran. We are allowed to travel as tourists. We're the only people in the world that can do that. And I said, I can't believe it. We should go. You should go in now. Here's a camera. I'm like, here, take it. Let's go. Let's go see what happens. And he goes, well, I've always wanted to do this. And so, we tabled that discussion and then the war broke out. And when Armenia lost the war to Azerbaijan, tragically, it's a really tough situation. Vahe called me up and he said, I need something beautiful in my life. What are you thinking for Iran? What if we did do it? And I went, my head exploded. So we had an opportunity to we hired a crew in Tehran. We didn't exactly tell them what we were doing, but we didn't lie to them either. We said we were doing a travel show for Armenian television is about the biggest lie we told. And effectively, it was a pre-shoot to see if there was anything worth shooting here. So we got these guys to bring cameras. These are guys who shoot carpet commercials in Tehran. They're not filmmakers. And they followed Vahe, and I had remote cameras on everything so I could remote direct, and we did tons of planning. And it was a very, very, very lucky situation that we were able to go. But it was the scariest thing I've ever been through as a filmmaker. I was so nervous for everybody in the film. I'm still nervous. I hope that this message isn't misinterpreted by the Iranian government. I hope that everyone's nice and safe. And I hope in the end, Iran sees that they truly do have some of the most beautiful and greatest grapes the world has ever made. And I hope that they allow some people to make some small amount of wine because Iranians are prideful people. And if they find out they do it the best, maybe they'll let it happen. So I don't know. Yeah, it was a wild, wild situation.
It's kind of crazy to think that 19, 20 miles is it's not a great distance, but it seems like maybe the I'm not a wine connoisseur, but is the grapes far different from each other from just a tiny region apart?
Completely different. And the thing that's also really important to state is this grape that's in Iran is called Rasha, and it exists nowhere else in the world. There's not been there's been no genetic work done on it. I mean, it is still the same species, but it's a complete, I mean, it would go back thousands of years ago. It became what it is through selective breeding and picking and everything else. And so that grape has been in that spot for thousands of years in Kurdistan. And then over in Armenia, the Arni grape has been for thousands, literally since Neolithic period. That's how long it's been growing in that place. So the thing with grapes is the longer it's in a place, the more it becomes that it needs that particular place. It needs that soil, it needs the dryness. Grapes don't adapt quickly. And so it's very different. I mean, and sometimes like it can be shorter. You know, in France, you can go from one vineyard to the next and the wines are completely different. I mean, truly. And it's wild the way that does happen. So yeah.
That is crazy. Now, in the case with the father-daughter, your main subjects, how did you discover them and convince them to be part of your documentary?
Well, this is one thing I got lucky with. I went to Armenia and I did not even have them on my radar. A producer of mine had met them and said, look, these people are going to be very important. Well, he was talking about Vahe, the father. And he said, you got to do at least an interview. And I'm like, well, we've got a lot of old churches to film in, so I don't really have time. But then I met him for lunch and we probably drank 6 or 7 bottles of wine. And he's the funniest guy I ever met and just so smart and so charismatic. I mean, he turned into my Indiana Jones in the movie. I mean, he was a guy that I just never expected to meet in my whole life. And so I met his daughter, and I have 2 daughters. And immediately when I saw, here's a guy who sees that his daughter is going to replace him and do a better job than him, and she is a ball of nerves and worried about her father. It reminded me a lot of my daughter. I get them into a lot of trouble. And so I thought, I totally changed the entire movie from this kind of planet Earth about the history of grapes and religion and humans into a character driven story focusing on Vahe and Amy traveling through what they were doing. And of course, I gotta sell a film like that to people who have really never heard of Armenia. I mean, most of America has never couldn't point to that country on a map. And so it's a risky proposition, but with a character like Vahe, it was doable. And I didn't really have to convince him. He was so excited to meet somebody who is as nuts as he was about something. And I was about making this film as he was about making wine. So it was good.
Yeah, for you personally, Jason, I want to say this is your fourth, you could correct me if I'm wrong, fourth film in the SOMM
Mhm.
series. So
That's correct.
why why do a lot of documentarians like to, diverge out into many different subjects. Every time they finish it, they do something entirely different, but you keep on coming back into the SOMM. So tell us about your love for this series.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in this that they're not really direct sequels per se. I mean, they have some of the same cast, but every single time I make one of these things, I'm telling you, I go in the backyard, I get down on my knees, and I say, I will never do that again. That's it. This is the last one. I did it on the first one, I did it on the second one, I did it on the third one, and I could not believe when I started making the fourth. But they basically, like I said, wine can be, if you wanted me to tell a story about Formula One racing and wine had to be at the center, I could do it. If you needed me to tell a story about the Nazis and wine had to be at the center, I could do it. Same goes for, British imperialism in Asia. I could make it about wine. You would be shocked how many things wine has to do with everything. And so for me, I've built up all these connections for so many years in this field. And also, very few things can get somebody to say yes to something more than sending them a nice or a rare bottle of wine. I found, you can send somebody anything and they say thank you. You give them a bottle of wine and they say let's drink it. And so all of a sudden you're like let in the door and they sit at the table with you instead of going, thanks for this gift. And so I found wine to be, something that, what do they say in Godfather 3? It's I just when I got out, they pulled me back in. It's like every time I try to go and leave, I find something that I can't sleep because it's so fascinating as a concept. And so I have a ghost story coming that's sort of about wine. It's about a haunted winery and it's a documentary, but it's wild. And so you talk about pushing as far as we can. I'm going to see how far we can push this thing. We'll see. I mean, I've made other films too. I've made films about Hollywood history and food and other things, you know, but yeah.
Most excellent. Well, let me start wrapping things up with you, Jason. I'm taking a little bit of your time here.
Oh, no worries.
What, as audiences have a chance to watch some The Cup of Salvation, what is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
If we're talking about like an American audience, I hope that truly, I hope they see people of like, for me, I didn't, what an Iranian or an Armenian or any of these groups of people, I think there's no face to them. There's no face. And that goes for almost every small ethnicity that has come to the United States or lives in different places that the US just doesn't, my cohorts just don't understand. So if they watch this movie, I hope they see different people in a different way. I hope you see a face to a name now, and it's not just some headline buried in the BBC News, about Armenia or about Iran. You see that there are people that are just like you know, all around the world. I'm hoping that it brings people together like wine does. I do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before I log off,
Hmm?
one of the things I have to say is congratulations for earning the James Beard Award
Yes, thank you.
for this film. I didn't even know that they even have James Beard Awards for for filmmaking.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, they've been doing it. It's, you're always up against like Netflix and all the big guys, are so it's a tremendous honor. It really, really is, and it goes. It's less of an honor for me and more for just everybody that risked their neck on this movie that it was recognized. So it just means the world to us. It really does. So yeah.
Most excellent. Well, Jason, thank you very much for speaking to us for some the Cup of Salvations. Thank you. And who knows? Maybe there'll be a fifth movie, but you'll you'll keep on debating on that one. So we'll see.
Thank you, Gig. I appreciate it. Oh boy.
Thank you.